We're back. T.A. Mahoney, Tales from the Dark Side. Got another one of my buddies with me today. I usually call them weirdos, but I don't want you to think too bad of this guy. But usually, if you spend a week with me, you got to be a weirdo. If me and you get along for a week, something just ain't setting right. But I got Captain Dave Marquette, a great friend, customer, everything. Met him a long time ago. What I want to talk about first, Dave, is we're going to have a good conversation, some good stories. I've done a lot of stuff with you, but I looked up today. I Googled your name.
Oh, boy.
And no, everything was good, but there was just so much. It kept going back and back and back and back, and I finally read one that was, how long have you been guiding the Tampa Bay area?
Almost, 51 years.
Yeah, it said 1970.
Well, yeah.
Is that right? Somewhere in that neighborhood? That's great.
You didn't, well, you asked how long I've been guiding, since I was 14, but legally 51
Beautiful.
years. There you
Yeah,
go.
that's awesome, and such a long time. And you actually started out offshore, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about that. I know you were a big part of Old Salt. It seems like back in the day, the Loop tournament you'd told me about. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Well, the first club that I was involved with actively was called Gold Triangle Sports Fishing Club, and it was centered. Phil Woods owned Inter Bay Marine Sales, now where Hula Bay is.
Right.
And that was the home of Gold Triangle Sports Fishing Club. And when I was about 18, I bought a 17 Mako and ran the bottom out of it. And then I bought a 20 Mako, and I started grouper fishing out of that 20-foot Mako, and I ran it over to Jupiter, and we kingfished and sailfished out of it the whole nine.
Oh
my gosh!
Back then. Yeah.
Had a 115 on it, buddy.
Yeah, that was big stuff.
Right, and I fell in love with the 23 Seacraft. It was a predecessor of all other high performance center console boats, and I had two used ones, and then I bought one brand new and customized it. I'm the first person to ever put a single outboard on a 23 Seacraft ever.
Yeah. And back then, what'd you have to put on that? 235 maybe?
No, we had a Mercury on it. The very first motor was a 200.
Yeah.
And then it went to 225, and then I put a Yamaha on it.
Man, that was a big boat back then.
32 trips to Walker's Cay in the Bahamas.
That's awesome.
On that one boat.
What kind of fish over there?
Everything.
Blue marlin,
everything
grouper?
that swam. Yeah, we have. You couldn't just go buy a badass fishing boat like you can now. I mean,
right.
You really couldn't. You had to build it, and Walker's Cay's slow season is when all of the northern boats go home to fish off Carolina and fish off Jersey and all of that. So to stimulate business when their slow season they had a small craft tournament series. Mako had a very successful owners series of tournaments for years and years, and I fished in those when I had a Mako, and then just about the time the King Mackerel tournament started and all, Walker's Cay had small craft tournaments, and I was just eat up with it. That was back in the day when you were on the way to Walker's, there'd be DC-3s flying over you with the side doors open and the guys waving at you.
Man, good times too.
Yeah.
What's one of the most memorable trip that you've had over there at Walker's Cay back in the day?
Well, we had qualified for the Masters. And anybody that's fished an old 23 Seacraft knows that every boat's got a flaw. The flaw in that boat was that it had a low stern. And mine had the live well against the transom inside the boat. So it was a really low stern. Really low stern. And we were trolling chin weighted silver mullet and hooked a double on blue marlin.
Wow.
And my bilge pump quit.
And so back down.
And I had to back down. We're fighting two fish at once. had to back down, and I had a very good friend of mine who is still a fabulous, really good friend of mine. Byron Terwilliger was on the boat. One of my lifelong best friends, Don Lim, was on the boat, and we had our girlfriends there. So there were 5 of us on the boat, fighting 2 blue marlin at one time, and the boat sinking.
No bilge pump.
And the bilge pump was out. So I had to call a mayday, and it was just one of those deals where, the good Lord saved us. And I'd like to say we caught both fish, but we didn't. Sharks got one, and the other one, with a boat full of water, the other one spooled us. We couldn't get after him, and so I finally got down in that bilge, and them 12-volt batteries were eating me up. But I hand wired the bilge pump back, and we eventually got it pumped out and didn't sink it.
Yeah, if one of the I think one of the blue marlin get eaten by sharks, I think I'd get that bilge pump working pretty quick.
Exactly. I've had that happen a few times with sharks getting blue marlin. Another time we were off Key West, and we hooked a little blackfin tuna, and we were fighting that blackfin tuna in on 30-pound tackle, and out of the corner of my eye I see this submarine coming at the blackfin tuna, and the blue marlin ate the blackfin tuna.
Wow.
And we hooked the blue marlin. And we had him on for about 3.5 hours and had him close to the boat, and a giant shark got the blue marlin. So we watched it go from that was a ballyhoo, from a ballyhoo to a little blackfin tuna, from a little blackfin tuna to a blue marlin, from a blue marlin to a big shark got him.
The whole food chain right there.
Right
buddy.
in one time, yep. Yeah, that was.
And then what'd you do there? You kind of quit on the offshore and wanted to go inshore. Was that early '90s, maybe, or?
Well, so Dr. Rory Crabtree was made the head of the Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council when it first started.
Yeah.
And he was the one, and the Gulf Council was the one that was sort of responsible for putting out charter permits for reef fish, and for pelagics and for highly migratory stuff. And at that time, I was commercial hook and line and grouper and doing sports fishing charters. I sold thousands of pounds to Bern Laxer at Bern Steakhouse and other real high-end restaurants here. And he wouldn't give me a charter permit for the Seacraft. So, and I was doing it part-time then too. I mean, I had a job, a real job, and when the Gulf Council made what was known at that time as a day fleet, stopped selling grouper, we had to sell to a wholesaler, and you couldn't sell without a license. You just couldn't make the numbers work.
Right.
You could not. I couldn't. I didn't have any money, so the boat had to pay for itself, and you couldn't make it work on straight charter rate. And then they wouldn't let me charter beyond state waters. So the truth is, I blew an outboard. I kept the boat for 10 years after I blew the outboard, the old shameless hussy.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking in the back of my mind I was going to have enough money to put it back in the water, and I never did. And so I bought a used skiff and started guiding inshore, and that was.
Now, when I met you, you were, I believe, sponsored by Hydrosport and doing some writing in the paper maybe at the time. I mean, you've really done that forever, but when I think was just the time that you'd either got rid of Hydrosport or you were with them? Or?
I was really fortunate in the early days of inshore fishing to work with a few good companies about developing boat product. The first one was Hydrosports. They wanted to convert bass boats to inshore flats boats, and it's a whole different ball game, because in flats boats we're running around in shallow water all the time. And speed is not the critical factor. And in bass boats, they want the last mile an hour out of the boat. They very rarely run around in real shallow water. They do occasionally, but very rarely. So the design criteria were two different things. I was then approached by Proline, and I got to work with Proline on developing some pretty good product. And then after Proline with Ranger, and I've still got my Ranger. I just.
I remember I knew a guy who was fishing with Hydrosport, and this is, of course, after you were already sponsored there and went on to another venture. I think you were in Ranger. You've been in Ranger for at least, I would say, 20 years that I know of, somewhere in that neighborhood. But
Well, the boat I run is a 2000, actually a 2004 that's a 2010.
yeah,
Yeah.
I got you. So it was right around 04, 02, or whatever you started dealing with it.
Yep.
But I'd
02.
fished the Kingfish circuit with a guy named Alex, and I'd brought
Oh,
up
boy,
your name.
Alex Leva.
Great guy. Great
Yeah.
guy still to this
Love
day.
him. Yeah.
I asked him about Dave Marquette, and I go, what happened there? And he goes, let me tell you something. That guy can tear an anvil up. When we ask him to use something, he uses it and tells us when it's going to break. And I thought, that's fishing. And one person that knows that better than anybody is Alex,
Yep.
because he's a fisherman. And he knows that these guys, and I can tell you from firsthand experience from day one, I think one of my first fishing trips with you was probably, I believe the guy's name was Joe from, was it the Tubes, Berkeley?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Berkeley tubulars, sure.
Yeah, they first come out, and I mean, just unbelievable. Like a little squid is what it looks like, a little
exactly.
squid lure. But you'd put a jig head on them, and of course, if you've ever gone with Dave, when you go with sponsors or something, if you're in the industry, you're probably not going to go on the best day, because the best day, Dave's going to be fishing a client that wants to go with Dave. He's been doing it so long. He's going to have that. So I think what we had was probably the coldest day of the year.
Coldest day in 5 years.
Everybody would say you're crazy, you're stupid. We're pretty sure we were the only guys out there.
Only boat on the water.
I mean, I didn't see any more.
Yep.
Super low tide, super hard to fish, and I want to think that it was somewhere in the neighborhood, wasn't it, 100 trout between all of us that we had caught. It was one after another after another. I mean, all day.
Right.
Unbelievable. And really, I kind of like fishing. I fish with a lot of guides. I get to meet them in here, and that's really what I like to do. I don't mind a bad day, because a bad day, that guy who's good has fished bad days. And that day, I mean, we tore them up. You couldn't ask for any better fishing. You put foul weather gear on, you hide behind islands, and you go fishing.
You probably don't remember, but after you'd caught about 100 trout, you looked over at me and you said, all right, Captain, I want to catch a redfish. I said, okay. And we went into Tierra Verde docks, and we went to maybe a half a dozen docks. and the butcher rolled a tube lure up under a dock, and I saw a flash under the dock, and he didn't even know he got bit. I said, you got him. And he looked at me like I had four eyes, and he cranked down, and he had him, and he caught him.
Yeah, I wasn't real big on, I'd say 20 years ago, I probably wasn't real big on artificial.
No.
I like that live bait. I'd learned that live bait, and when you're not, be honest with you, the easiest thing to do is to live bait fish. Whether you're offshore or inshore, you crush up a bunch, you throw them out there, they pop, you throw your bait out and catch a fish. When you catch something on artificial, you're doing something.
Yep.
I don't care if it's a gold spoon and you're just retrieving. You've tricked him.
Right.
You actually got him with a hook in it and a live bait. Yeah, you're tricking him, but not really the same thing. I mean, I don't think, to me, your skill level's different. So,
there's no question. And we're so fortunate in West Central Florida to have the lure manufacturers that we have
for
here.
Sure. That fish.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like Eric and like Mark
absolutely.
Nichols.
And Eric, Mark Nichols, Steve Marusak at Cody, and we're just so fortunate to I still look at the industry, and I still try to stay up on it, and the crazy thing is that after decades, and this new lure and that new lure and this person saying it's the hottest thing since warm butter and so forth, the same lures, 52 M11 mirror lure.
Yeah.
Dalen, my son, Captain Dalen Marquette, and I, the very first time there was ever a Redfish Championship, ever. and it was
Was that local? Or
it was it was held in Jacksonville. We had to qualify. We fished all around the state,
a
and
guy named Grady ran it.
Shady Grady.
Shady Grady, I remember that. I remember
Shady Grady.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, buddy. And it was in Jacksonville, and there was one measuring board for the Jacksonville anglers, and there was another for everybody else.
They still doing that,
Oh, man.
I think.
I saw 28 and a half inch redfish measured at 27. Dalen and I were fishing out of this Ranger, and you know my Ranger's a heavy boat. It's not fast and it's not light. And we ran up the intercoastal, and we'd found a couple of tidal creeks that had a fish or two in it, and we literally were stirring mud to get in this thing, and got into a hole. And Dalen was at Gaither High School, so Dalen had come in that night to fish that next morning. And we were on the front of the boat, and I said, "Throw that mirror lure right on across down this little tidal creek into a little hole that was in the back of it." And I said, "Just count to 4 and then twitch it one time." And Dalen got to 3, and the line popped, and I threw my mirror lure. Before Dalen set the hook, I had my mirror lure right there. He set the hook, and I set the hook, and we had 2 perfect 27-inch fish, the first 2 casts we made in the tournament.
That's awesome.
And
did you win, or was it a multi-day?
Well, what we were was it was multi-day for sure. We were second place the first day, and we finished third.
That's awesome.
And you remember the story about the winning fish flopping out of the boat?
No.
So the third day they put camera people on the lead boats.
Right.
And at that point in time, I was driving a big heavy Ranger. So most of the guys were in real light, real pretty.
Yeah, especially Jacksonville.
Oh, yeah.
It was shallow water.
So they had first time ever I'd had a live cameraman on the boat. And we went back to where we caught our 2 fish. Dalen caught a perfect fish on a jig, and we couldn't make the fish that were there bite. Couldn't make them bite. And so we fished all day long, and we caught a couple of small fish. And then I hooked a really good fish. It wasn't 27, but it was 25 and a half or 25 and 3/4 to go with Dalen's perfect fish. Got him in the boat. The cameraman looks at me and said, "Captain, I didn't get a really good picture of that fish. Will you let me get another picture of that fish?" We already had a 27 in the box. I reached in that live well and got my fish out, and that fish, I mean, the first thing he did, he sensed freedom. He saw daylight, and he liked to have killed me getting off the bow of that boat. And it went in the water, and they used that footage for years as their lead footage for the thing. But we ended up like 4th or 5th, But I mean, you remember the ones that get away.
Oh yeah, you never forget those. Well, great stories right here. We're going to take a break, and we're going to bring you back a few more. We'll be right back. We're back. T.A. Mahoney, Tales from the Dark Side. I got one of my good buddies here, Captain Dave Marquette. We were talking in the last segment. I got a question for you, Dave. I heard you kind of mumble something, and most of the time I don't have too many people don't give me a name, okay? And people out there said, well, all the people I got, Tulu Red and Shuffles and Matt Slap and all the names I got, Big Sticky. They always ask, what's your name? And there's only been one that came up, but I heard you say it a minute ago, and I want you to explain that a little bit. Where'd that come from?
You.
What was the name you spouted out there?
Your name is Butcher.
And why is that?
Why?
Let's talk about that.
Oh, Lord.
Where did that come from? Where did that start?
You earned it. I mean, there were years when you'd come into this store. Now, first off, you got to remember, I was in T.A. Mahoney's when you were digging in the 1/4-inch nut bin with
Yeah.
a slingshot and shooting cats and rats in the old store
I
on the
believe it.
banana dock.
I believe it. I was.
And
doing
I
that.
remember.
I
See?
was doing that.
I know. I remember. The store's been open 70 years, and I've been going in it 65. I'm 71.
Yeah,
I was in that
70
store at 5 or 6 years old.
75 years.
Well, I'm just saying I've
Next
been
year,
in it 65 years.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, you're not 65. So, but I remember your grandma and your grandpa and all the generations. And I remember when you were just a little fella and you were just all about making all the animals in the
That
store
was
miserable.
daycare. That
Right.
was daycare.
Daycare, yep.
Mom said, take him to work with you.
Right.
He ain't staying with me.
Well, when you really got interested in fishing, and you've always had a lot of guide friends because you keep us on the water. It doesn't matter who it is.
I got you. I can always
Yep,
negotiate
you
a fishing
can.
trip.
You can, absolutely. And you saved me how many times?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
like I said, how much have I broke?
But it's mutual. We all know that.
I can tell you that this is this is my oldest. What I call it is a companionship. A lot of people call it sponsorships, but we help each other. We
right.
respect each other,
Yep.
and we help each other. And I'm very thankful for that. But there was a time, and probably the only reason you're not still doing it is because every game warden knows your name and your profile. But there was a time when there was not an oversized snook safe anywhere in Tampa Bay.
I loved it.
That's where the name came from. People, oh, those big female snook ain't any good to eat. You'd look out on the front gate and there'd be 5 carcasses in the morning hanging up out there to brag about.
But I had 5 people with
You
me.
never met a snook you didn't want to kill.
I agree.
There-
if it
there
was
you go.
legal, I'm taking it, and I ate it. And
Well,
I
it
never,
depends upon who you talk to about that. I mean, folks, look here. That's his Chihuahua, and
Yeah.
that's his yellow-eyed deer.
That's
I mean,
right.
it all depends upon your interpretation. We talked about that a bit earlier, of
Oh, yeah.
exactly what the word means at the given time it's used.
That's right.
There you go.
And don't tell on yourself. Now, you got to realize.
I'm not telling on myself.
Hey, back in the day,
I'll tell you what.
you remember Gandy Bait and Tackle.
Oh,
We've
boy.
talked about it on this show before. He had a snook tree. And when you caught a 40-incher, you were allowed to take that head and nail it to the tree. And that was one of the proudest moments I can remember snook fishing.
Right.
Is when you got to nail that head to the tree, and you got to go by there for a week showing it to people.
But Mike, with you, it was deforestation. You had snook heads
found them.
nailed to every tree around every bridge on the whole south end of the south shore of the bay.
I had them in my yard. I had them in the store. I had them
Right.
everywhere. You're
Right.
right about that.
Right.
What happened to me, Dave, was when I started snook fishing, big snook, and you got to realize 30 years ago, big snook were not easy to catch here in Tampa Bay.
Right.
Only a handful of people could catch big snook. Whether they didn't know how to do it, they didn't spend the time. But Dave was one of those. Well, see, nobody would ever tell me anything. It was real, just hush hush. We're not going to help the new guy out. Well, then I went and found it myself.
Yeah.
I figured it out, and I did a lot of research. I mean, I'd take 1 or 2 days off a week. Like you said, I'd try to go with the best that was coming in my store. I work a deal with them. All of a sudden, I'm on the boat, and they knew I was going to be coming back out there. And it just, what's funny is sometimes people will say to me, they'll say, well, look who you've been fishing with. And I said, yeah, who? And they're like, well, Dave Marquette and Ernie Rubio and Tommy LaRange. And I said, yeah, so what? Well, that's why you catch so many fish. And I think to myself, well, I fished with them 30 years ago when they were nobody. When they didn't, I mean, Dave was 30 years ago, but some of the other guys I fished with were literally nobody. Nobody knew their name or nothing. And that's what it is about building that rapport for the passion. Dave, there is no doubt in my mind You have the passion to fish. I fished with you. I love fishing with you because there's no give. I took, I want to talk about this story. We're going to jump back and forth and talk about tarpon, but they used to go down to Boca Grande for a couple months, right? Two and a half months.
I still do.
You're down there that long?
Yeah.
2.5?
Well, 2 months now.
2 months fishing for tarpon. He was really involved in the PTTS Team of the Year. He's won all kinds of stuff down there. Well, I had some guys from Canada, and this is a great story. We were up in Canada hunting in the trophy room, and the guy had known that I was a fisherman and had a fishing business from Tampa, and he was a fisherman from up there. And we were talking back and forth, and a tarpon show came on TV. And the guy's fighting a fish, and he looks at me and he says, if you can take me fishing, I want to go with that guy. Well, that guy was Dave Marquette, my buddy, and I'm in Canada, and this guy's thinking he's going to say something to me that ain't going to happen. And I said, you want to fish with that guy? That's a done deal. I know I can get him to take you tarpon fishing. He's a friend of mine. So we went down, and that was one of the hardest days. You fit us in that year. You're always booked. Like we were talking off air, if anybody wants to do tarpon fishing, call him now. Book him now. Get your deposit. Dave gets booked up quick. One of the best in Boca Grande for sure. But these guys called me late from Canada. It was probably in April, and said we're coming in a couple of weeks. So Dave fit me in early. Early means that the fish aren't biting as much as they will be in another couple of weeks, but there's tarpon there. We can catch one, Mike. That ain't a problem. We just ain't gonna set the world on fire because they're not in there yet. We had to go search for them. We went on one of the worst days of the year. I mean, it was 4-foot seas in the pass. We're bouncing. I got these guys from Canada that are used to be on ice fishing, sitting still. And we're bouncing and bouncing, and Dave says, you know what, we're done. There ain't none here. They're out of here. Let's go. Took off. If you remember, you dropped me off with the Canadians. My buddy Dave Paul stayed in the boat with you. Y'all shot around to Punta Gorda. Picked us up from around 41 in Punta Gorda, and we fished the mouth of that river and caught tarpon. That's how hard your guide should work, and that's how hard Dave works. It was a great story, and it shows you one of the worst days of the year. Weather, wind, early season, we still got everybody from Canada a tarpon. And time after time, I've taken those same people to catch big snook. They catch big snook. The wife catches big snook. The husband catches big snook. Everybody's catching them. Dave can catch it all. He's been out there forever. I thought it was kind of funny about the butcher. I remember what happened is I was catching so many big fish. These guys kind of gotten a little ploy against me and said, no more 40 inchers. Mahoney's killing too many. So they passed the rule. And that was the time I had them hanging on the fence. I caught them for 4 days straight. I went to a temporary labor service and picked me up 10 guys, paid them by the hour, and I took their limit. I was on them. I'm telling you, I love them big snook. It did something for me. Not as much today, but I still appreciate a big fish. You know, I kind of like that offshore a little bit. Now, we're talking about tarpon fishing down in Boca Grande, the PTTS. It was that professional series. Dave, you fished it every year, right?
I did.
How many?
No, I missed one. I stayed out of it 1 year. One year.
And that was, you've won what, Team of the Year, several tournaments, women's tournaments, just every box checked, it seems like.
Well, you know, that was really an amazing period in time, and it could have certainly been handled better.
Yeah.
Boca Grande is a storied place of fishing. It's you know, my family had their roots in Florida at the end of the 19th century and the end of the 1800s in Arcadia, and my family had a big hand in putting the railroad into Boca Grande, and so my dad grew up fishing the phosphate dock. It actually was a cattle dock. It wasn't a phosphate dock till later.
That's right.
And also our family has had roots down there a long time, but you know, if you go back and study the history of tarpon fishing on the southwest Florida coast, it initially was not in Boca Grande. It initially was in the Caloosahatchee River in Fort Myers. That's where all of the tarpon fishing was done.
I got you.
And
still good there, right?
yeah, but so the railroad went into Boca Grande. They built some resorts there. They were bringing people in from the north, and so the big hotels were at Boca Grande, and so the guide business sort of went from the Caloosahatchee River to Boca Grande. Guides were arguing with each other about how to fish for tarpon and how to catch them then. Fist fights in the bars, on the streets and all. It's just always been controversial. All of the initial fishing for tarpon in Boca Grande was on a jig. They called it a feather, but it was a weighted jig. I'm sure tied with chicken feathers. And so when the resorts came to Boca Grande, the Grand Hotels, then they would have a motor launch take a string of rowboats and a captain in every rowboat, and then they would drift the pass and so forth. So it was sort of a it became traditional method of fishing. So along comes Vic Dunaway and Herb Allen and the Mirror Lure family, and they go down to Boca Grande and start using artificials to fish for tarpon. Well, they jumped them like crazy. They had a hard time keeping the fish hooked, but they had phenomenal action, and those guys were threatened. If they didn't quit fishing like that in the past, they were going to come to an untimely end.
Right.
And anyhow, so the tarpon fishery at Rio Perismina and in Perismina, whatever it is, in Costa Rica, started with a jig called a Seahawk. And they were fishing at the mouths of those rivers in raging current and dangerous waves and just ripping the tarpon a new lip. So some guys from Grand Isle, Louisiana, his nickname was Coon, and his last name was Chef.
Coon Pot, wasn't it?
Coon Chef went down to Costa Rica, experienced that fishery. He started experimenting with a lure that was unique to Louisiana, and he got it done, and it was called a Coon Pot.
That's right.
And so
great story.
The families that lived in Boca Grande. Now understand, Boca Grande tarpon fishing used to have tide tournaments. Miller's Marina had tarpon tide tournaments, and big corporations would entertain there. So not only was there a cash purse to win, there were huge Calcuttas. Nothing to have a $50,000 Calcutta every week. So,
matter of fact, had the name the
World's Richest. They still use that name down there now. They still do. But anyhow, so two families left Boca Grande and flew to Grand Isle, Louisiana, and hired Coon Chef to take them to show them how to use coon pot.
And a great fishery in Louisiana for tarpon. They get a good flow of them.
Correct. And later normally.
Later than
they get an early push, and then usually it's September, October. Anyhow, so those families came back to Central Florida and sponsored some molds to be made, and that is where the 12 Fathom Jig Company came from. And so 12 Fathom Jig started. 12 fathoms is the depth of the deepest water in Boca Grande Pass, unless it's sanded in. But I mean, it's 72 feet is the big hole. So they developed this jig that was poured with soft lead, and the rest is history. So the 12-fathom jig started catching tarpon like you have never seen. Yep. Never seen. And then the Cody Jig Company got involved with it and got another couple of families of local guides down there. So there was a competition between the Cody Jig guides and the 12-fathom guides, and there were a couple of others that were highly in competition. Well, what happened is that the jig started catching the big fish. The live bait, the way live baits are presented down there, certain tarpon stratify in that pass. So the adolescents are on top, and then the teenagers are below them, and then the mature fish are below the teenagers, and then all the way down on the bottom are the giant mamas. All giant tarpon are female, all of them. And so they were learning how to fish these jigs. At that time, they were breakaway, and so they started winning all the money, and that was not well received, because the traditional local guides down there counted on that Calcutta money and that tournament money to get them through the year.
I think that was Ed Walker won a bunch of money there.
Eddie Walker won. Yeah, that's sort of the day that Boca Grande exploded.
Yeah.
He won first place, second place, and tied for third place for most releases.
Set them on fire.
I
remember
exactly.
That. Yeah.
And so, but you can't blame Eddie for doing it. No. Eddie's a phenomenal fisherman.
Yes, he is.
And he just like you were saying earlier, he read the rules. There was no rule against it. He fished within the rules and won. So every time from that point on, they'd change the rules trying to keep us out.
Right.
So along comes Gary Ingman Marine in South Florida, and along comes a few other people, and they decide that they're going to have a series of televised tarpon tournaments. And they hire a front man, Joe Mercurio, who is really good as an announcer. Joe was a very young guy at that time, and buddy, he had his A game down.
Yeah.
And so they put cameras in Boca Grande Pass.
Yeah.
And where the live bait tournaments would ordinarily win with 110-pound fish or 115 or 128 or whatever, it was taking 180s to win the PTTS.
Tearing them up.
And I mean,
what's your biggest fish down there on a jig?
Oh, the biggest fish, the biggest tarpon that I have ever had my hands on was caught by a lady who was the girlfriend of Chris Sullivan, who was the founder of Outback Steakhouse.
Yep.
That fish was over 300 pounds. I had my hands on it. The biggest fish that I have ever had weighed was 249.
Monster.
And the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, FWC, was doing a tarpon study, which we helped with.
We call them fish cops here.
I got you. But this was a DNA mapping study, and they were doing blood gas, and they were doing all kinds of scientific analysis. And we handed them their measurement, their calculation was 249. Now, the biggest one that I have ever put into a tournament was 189. We've caught bigger fish, but catching a big fish on a non-tournament day, and catching a big fish on a tournament day is a whole different story.
There. That's my take on that whole thing when I saw it go down there, and that's exactly what happened. And it's one of the things I try to do for Mahoney's. I try to think industry-wide a good decision. If I'm making a decision about something, it's not always necessarily about me. It's about the whole industry, right? So I looked at it as Boca Grande got the tourism.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Correct.
What it brought those people down there. And just being an outsider, of course, my name was on your boat, so I got a little bit into the controversy. It didn't last too long, but they put my name out there for a while because I was on the side of your boat and everybody's attacking you. But, really it looked like the rich people kind of felt like they should have been the one highlighted on the TV screen. And to be honest with you, if you're not good enough to catch fish, you don't need to be on TV. You know, I mean, Dave Marquette and the crew, all them guys down there. We could sit here and name 100 of them.
Well,
Jamie Goodwin and Hagelman. I mean, everybody who
Artie Price was
Artie Price,
Artie
another one,
Price. Artie Price was certainly the winningest captain in PTTS history. There's no
I
question
think he's the
about that.
winningest captain in every tournament he's ever. I fished against him in the Redfish
Oh, yeah.
Cup, and I'll tell
He's-
you right now, you very seldom. You hear me talk trash about the Watts brothers. You better bring your game if you're going to beat Artie Price.
Correct.
I mean, he's the only guy I know that was carrying a lower unit in his boat.
And needed it on several
I
occasions.
saw him at the dock, and there was a lower unit bolted or sitting there on the bottom of the boat, and I'm going, "Hey man, what's that for? That don't look too good." And he goes, "You know what? I lost 30 grand one time coming back. Blew a lower unit, couldn't weigh the fish. I got a lower unit in my boat in case the lower unit blows. I can pull up on a sandbar and put one out."
Oh yeah.
I thought, "Holy cow!"
Well,
He's
he's
ready to
also the
fish.
one that really, Artie used to fish the Redfish tournament in the fastest bass boat that Ranger made.
Ranger. It was a crossover, I think.
I mean,
Gelcoat.
yeah, and he was sort of the parent of running 80 or 90
Oh,
miles.
absolutely, no
to,
doubt.
To,
go
fish
catch two
15
fish.
minutes to turn around and go back.
Catch two and come back and
Right.
collect your money.
Right. Artie Price is a very good friend of mine. He is absolutely honest. He's just like Mike Mahoney. Is if he can find a hole in the rule, he'll work it as hard as that hole
That's
can be
part
worked.
of tournament fishing.
Exactly. But as far as a man with strong character and honesty, Artie Price is it.
First class guy. You know, we're talking a lot about fishing, and we're going to get into some hunting.
Oh boy.
We got some hunting stories too. Dave was probably one of my first guys that took me under his wing like he did a bunch of people, and really took care of them as far as somebody wanting to hunt. Went up and took me to some killer property. I still have that property, leasing it today. We're pushing 20 years
20
on
years.
that hunt.
Yeah.
And one thing I know about Dave, that back in the early days when I first met him, and even up to today, I think I initially met you through either the Guides Association or it was FCA at the time, I think. It was one of those two. Always into charity and always into bettering this industry. There's no doubt if there's ever a tournament, he's always involved. If it's helping kids, wounded warriors, breast cancer, the list goes as long as you can see. Dave's usually part of it. He's done. If anybody's ever been up here and at our Customer Appreciation Day, which we're going to have one of those next year, be celebrating 75 years, Dave's going to be cooking the fish. Dave's going to making his famous hush puppies. I mean, some good stuff. We are done with the second segment. We're going to wrap it up here kind of quick, and we're going to be back. We're going to be talking hunting with Captain Dave Marquette. We'll see y'all in a little bit.